Hi everyone, I'm Emily with National Craft Society, and today we're going to be making nigiri sushi out of felt. Felt food is a great fun craft for all ages. The level is about, I'd say, beginner to intermediate, depending on how your hand sewing skills are. So for materials, you're going to want to start with your felt. I have just regular acrylic craft felt that you can get at any crafting store here. I have white for your sushi rice, and then I have a few different colors for my fish toppings. So depending on what you want, you can get whatever you like. I like to get orange for my salmon and my shrimp, some light pink for a piece of yellowtail, and a brighter color pink for my tuna. I'm also going to pick up some white fabric paint, preferably the puffy paint or the 3D fabric paint that's got this little applicator tip at the top, just to give our fish a little bit more dimension and paint in some of those grain lines. You're also going to want a sewing needle. My preferable sewing needle for this project is just a regular sharp sewing needle. It's a basic sewing needle. You're going to want some white thread for your rice. I like to have a little bit of thread wax on hand because it helps the thread move more smoothly through your felt. You're going to want some scissors. I'm going to use a little pair of snip scissors for my embroidery work. And I'm going to use a larger pair of scissors to cut out my felt pieces. You're also going to want some polyfill stuffing for your rice mounds. You want to have your nice glue gun handy for the end of the project, and a marking tool and a ruler so that you can make some pattern pieces for your fish and your rice. Now I've gone ahead and I've pre-made some pattern pieces on cardstock. I like to put them on cardstock because then it makes it easier to cut out all the pieces, makes it a little bit more faster and efficient. And also, if you keep them on cardstock, you can use them again later or pass them on to a friend if you like. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut our rice pattern just a little bit bigger than our fish pattern. So this is going to end up, I'm going to show you with the ruler just so you can see. This rice pattern is going to be about 1.5, and on the long side it's going to be about 2.5 inches. You can cut out a rectangle and then just round off the corners so that you can get your rice. And then I'm going to cut the sushi fish just a little bit smaller. So this one ends up measuring to about 1.25 by 2.25, just a little bit smaller. And you'll see it's because once you've stitched and filled your rice, it'll help these two line up a little bit better. So I'm going to take my marking tool and I'm going to cut out my fish first because I'm going to want to lay down that paint pretty early on so that it will start to dry. I'm going to take my rectangular piece here. I'm using a chalk marking tool. The reason I like the chalk marking tool is because it'll rub off later. It doesn't stay. If you have a pencil or a marker, that's fine to use too. If you are going to use something more like a marker or a pencil and you don't want your marking lines to show, then you can just cut on the inside line. But like I said, the nice thing about using the chalk is it dusts right off. I'm going to mark out a piece of yellowtail, which is my favorite. I'm going to mark out a piece for my salmon. And then I think I'd also like to have a piece of shrimp. So I don't have a shrimp one done, but it's very, very easy to make it just from the rectangle. So I'm going to draw out another rectangle, just like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to round out the two top corners for the top of the tail. Somewhere around midway, I'm going to come in, I'm going to indent in. I'm going to fan back out from either corner. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't think I've ever seen a perfectly symmetrical piece of shrimp anyway. And then I'm going to just cut in a little notch for the tail there. So we've got our 4 pieces cut, our 4 pieces marked out. And I'm just going to take my regular scissors and cut them. And like I said, because it's a chalk line, we don't have to be too worried. And our piece of salmon. All right, so there we have all of our little pieces of fish ready to go and be painted. I'm going to put them on this board. That way we don't get any paint on our table. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to lay in, if you look at those pieces of fish when you go eat sushi, there's usually those nice white lines, little pieces of fat in the grain line of the fish that makes it so delicious. So we're gonna paint a little bit of that in there. It just gives your project a little added texture and dimensionality. It makes it just a little bit more fun. And I'm gonna paint it just a little bit differently on each of them. Oops, that happens. Sometimes if I get a splotch like that where it kind of bubbles out, I just take the tip of my applicator and I just kind of move it to the side like it was on purpose. It's totally fine. And you can do straight lines. I'm gonna do some of my lines a little wiggly, just to add some character. And then for my little shrimp piece, I'm just gonna make some curved white lines like you might see on a shrimp. You know how it's broken down in that orange and white stripe pattern. And just about 3 or 4 is all you need. So there's those guys. So I like to paint these out first because then they can sit and dry while I'm working on stitching my rice pieces. So I have my rice mound pattern from before. Now because we're making 4 pieces, I'm going to go ahead and cut out 8 pieces of the rice. We'll need 2 pieces for each of our nigiri sushi. Since we're going to stitch the 2 pieces together, make like a little pouch. So there's 4. So we're just going to do a second row of these guys. So we've got our 8 pieces cut, laid out to cut. Cutting right down the middle here. Okay, so we have our 4 sushi mounds ready to go and to be stitched. I'm going to set these 3 guys aside and start out with my first one. Gonna get my little snippers ready. Again, this little guy right here is just a regular Sharps sewing needle. There's lots of different sewing needles. This one I like particularly for this project because it is a little bit dainty and small, so it's not going to put as giant of a hole in the felt as other sewing needles might. So what I'm going to do, you can see here I took a very long piece of thread. You don't have to use a piece this long. The way I like to knot my thread personally is I take it, I wrap it around my finger twice. I take my needle. I'm just going to go right through that loop that I made. I'm going to wiggle it off my finger and then just pull. It's going to make a pretty decent, clean double knot. And then just snip off the tail end here because you don't want that poking through later. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my thread and I'm going to run it through this little piece of thread wax. The thread wax just helps keep your thread conditioned and running smoothly through your felt so that it doesn't snag up. It also makes it less likely to tangle up on itself, especially if you're going to be adventurous like me and use a really, really long piece. You don't have to pin your pieces together. It's a pretty small piece that you're going to be working with pretty closely. You might want to take a look. Felt doesn't always cut out particularly evenly, so I like to just give it a once over, and if it looks like one piece of the pattern is sticking out just a little bit more over the other, I give it just a little bit of a trim before I start. So this side's pretty okay. And then I'm just going to match up this one corner. And then that should be fine. So we're going to make a 3-sided pouch of sorts so that we can stuff our polyfill in there. What I'm going to do is I like to start on the long end and come around. So if I take the 2 pieces aside, I'm going to start going from the inside of the felt. So I go through the 1 layer first so that I can hide my knot. It makes it a little bit easier. So I'm just pushing the needle in between the thread right up against the end of that knot. And I'm going to pull it through. I'm going to come right back up through the hole I just went through. And that's going to help pull that knot right to the inside so that we won't see it later. Now this stitch that I prefer to use is a stitch that was taught to me called a blanket stitch. The reason I like the blanket stitch, which you'll see in a little bit, is that it makes a nice line across the edge and it really locks it in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, we're on the upside, right? I'm going to come up through the back side, right next to where this stitch is coming out. I'm going to pull through, and you can see here it's created a loop. So I'm going to go up through that loop, like so, and pull it through, and it'll kind of lock it down. I'm going to go over by just a little bit, You can do your stitches as close or as far apart as you want. I like to keep them relatively close, between like 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. Again, so we've gone through the back side, up through the front side. We've created a loop. We're going to put our needle up and back through the loop. I'm going to say, just to help you out, go back towards the direction you've come from and pull it through. One more time, up through the back to the front. Go back towards the direction you came from through the loop and pull it through. And that's your blanket stitch. So we're going to go all along this long side, the short side, back up the other long side, and we're going to leave this part open. Don't pull your thread too tight. You want to pull it just a little firmly, but not so much that you start to pull out the actual felt itself. If you're pulling too hard, you're going to put holes in the felt and it's going to start to come apart. So you want to be firm yet gentle at the same time. Now when you come to this corner edge, to keep the corner nice and rounded, I start to do my stitches just a little bit closer together than before. And that just helps keep the corners and the roundedness nicer. Okay, so I've done all 3 sides of this piece and I'm ready to stuff it. I'm just letting my thread hang loose. I'm going to take some polyfill stuffing. It's just this kind of stuff that you use for pillows. I like to break it up into smaller pieces just because it's helpful. And I give it a little bit of smush. And then I open up this little pouch that I've made. Kind of stick my finger in there to really help it open up. And then you just stuff it right in. And you want to stuff it nicely, but you don't want too much in there. You don't want your seams to start bursting, and this polyfill also will start to come out of the sides and through other portions of the felt, and that's not fun either. So I take about, I'm gonna say, 2 pinches about this size to stuff in there, and that usually does the trick. Roughly about the size of 2 large cotton balls. And then the nice thing is with the polyfill, once you've finished stitching all around, you can kind of smush it with your fingers and help it make the shape that you really, really want. So I'm going to put the rest of this stuff back over here. And we're just going to continue with that blanket stitch right around the edge. This polyfill is going to want to start to poke its head out, so I like to smash it kind of deep down in there, flatten out those ends together, and then we're just going to keep moving around this last side. So then what I'm going to do is there's this first kind of loop around stitch right here. And I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through that stitch that's laying on the top there. I'm going to take one tiny little dip through the felt and pull my needle through to create a knot. It's just one simple knot. But that what I'm going to do is a thing that I call burying my knot. So I'm going to go back through here and I'm just going to stitch in between the layers. It doesn't have to be very neat, but you're going to go in between the layers, not on the top. And then I go back and forth just a couple of times. Just kind of anchor those little tail threads through there, and then snip it, and then you have your first piece. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish up stuffing and stitching the rest of my pieces, and I'll come back when it's time to glue our fish on. And there we go. So we've got our 4 little rice mounds ready to prepare with our fish. I've got my glue gun over here. It's all ready to go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take some glue and put it right down the middle. And then we're just going to lay that right across the top. And I like to press down on either end, and then a little bit in the center. Pop a little bit of glue right on the inside. See if he'll sit down just a little bit flatter. Nice piece of tuna. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a dot here for, I'm going to say, the head of the shrimp. So there's that. So that headpiece is already tacked down. So then what I'm going to do, see how I've kind of like flipped him over so that I can see his underbelly? I'm just going to line that with the glue. Again, about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch away from the edge so that it doesn't squeeze out the sides. You don't need a whole lot, just a nice thin strip of that glue is fine. Then you can go ahead and press him down. And there you go. A really super cute quartet of felt nigiri sushi. Thank you so much for joining me in making felt sushi today. If you've enjoyed what you've watched, be sure to like our video and visit us for more at nationalcraftssociety.org. I'm Emily. Have fun.